My name is Jessica Brown, and I'm 33 years old. If you ask anyone in my family, they'll probably tell you I've always been the odd one out, the daughter who didn't fit into the polished world of white-collar success, who never managed to keep her life as neat as a Christmas card photo. The last time I saw my brother alive was 3 months ago, at his engagement party in the heart of Philadelphia. Even now, flashes of that night play in my mind like a bad TV rerun. I remember standing in the corner of the ornate banquet hall, crystal chandeliers overhead, the kind of velvet carpeting that makes your shoes sink in like marshmallows, and feeling every bit like an undercover cop on the wrong side of a garler. I wasn't on duty, but I wore what felt natural: dark jeans, my favorite black North Face jacket, hair up in a messy ponytail. Everyone else floated by in tailored dresses and sharp suits, like they'd stepped off a magazine cover. The party buzzed with laughter, champagne flutes clinking, and a kind of competitive cheerfulness that always made me uneasy. My brother, Alex, was in his element, working the room with that easy smile he'd perfected since high school. His fiancée, Courtney, hung on his arm like an accessory you buy for the brand name, not the fit. I could hear bits of conversations drifting over: stocks, vacation homes in the Hamptons, law firm war stories. I was invisible, which I preferred. Until someone, probably one of Alex's colleagues, asked about his family. That's when his voice, smooth as ever, cut through the background. "Oh, Jess is here," he said, loud enough for a small group to glance my way. There was a pause, and then he added with a practiced laugh, "She works in law enforcement, police department, you know. Been a rough couple of years since the divorce, but she's hanging in." That stung, even if I'd learned to expect it. Alex had always known how to get under my skin without saying anything directly cruel. There was an art to the way he mentioned my job, as if being a police officer was something temporary, a fallback, maybe a phase I'd grow out of. His circle of friends nodded, their sympathy polite and a little condescending. I saw it in their eyes, the sad, supportive look you give someone who didn't live up to their Ivy League potential. I never corrected him. It wasn't worth it. Not at these family events, not when every word could spiral into another round of justifying my choices. Alex was the star: Harvard Law, 6-figure salary, the Manhattan condo with floor-to-ceiling windows. I was the girl who left for the Chicago Police Academy the summer after graduation. I can still remember the look on my dad's face when I told him, a mixture of disbelief and mild embarrassment. Like I'd just said I was moving to LA to become a street magician. For years, my mom would tell her friends, Jessica's with the police now, her tone both proud and vaguely apologetic. "We're hoping she'll get it out of her system soon." Even after I made detective, even after my name was in the Tribune for solving a cold case, my family treated it like I was still playing dress-up. At every holiday dinner, the spotlight would shine on Alex and his latest legal victory or investment. If someone bothered to ask about my work, the question was always followed by, "But are you dating anyone? Are you thinking of settling down?" The engagement party was no different. I hovered near the bar, sipping club soda, trying to avoid awkward conversations. Courtney's parents, who'd flown in from San Francisco and looked like they'd never used a coupon in their lives, cornered me at one point. "So what do you do, Jessica?" Courtney's mom asked, her smile gentle but distant, her pearls catching the light. Before I could answer, Alex jumped in. "Jess works security. Things have been tough since her divorce, but she's figuring things out." The pity in Courtney's mom's eyes was almost worse than the dismissiveness in my brother's voice. I excused myself to the ladies' room, where I stood under the harsh light, staring at my own reflection. I looked tired. I felt tired. For a second, I wondered if it would have made a difference if I just told them the truth, that my job was more than security detail at the mall. That the badge in my pocket wasn't some consolation prize. But some truths are too complicated, or too classified, or just too big for family dinner conversation. When I came back out, the party was winding down. Alex was in the middle of the room, surrounded by people who looked at him the way our parents had always looked at him, like he'd hung the moon. I caught his eye across the crowd. He smiled, half-waved, and then turned back to his friends, already moving on. For a moment, I felt like I was 17 again, standing on the outside looking in. I didn't stay much longer. As I left the party, walking out into the chilly Philadelphia night, I tried to tell myself that none of it mattered, that my worth wasn't measured by champagne toasts or who had the best story at a dinner party. But sometimes, no matter how strong you are, family finds a way to remind you of your old scars. After the party, I took the train back to my small apartment in DC and tried to sleep, but memories kept circling in my head like sirens. I remembered being a kid in Buffalo, where Alex and I grew up. Even then, he was the golden child. He got straight A's, made varsity soccer, and went to every prep school event in a pressed shirt and perfect hair. I was the one who came home muddy, always in trouble for climbing fences or running with the neighborhood kids until the streetlights flickered on. Our parents cheered for his spelling bee trophies and college acceptance letters. They merely tolerated my scraped knees and stubborn independence. Still, I found my place, eventually. While Alex was racking up debate medals, I was memorizing police radio codes and watching crime shows, fascinated by the way detectives saw what others missed. My mom thought it was a phase. Dad was more direct. "You're throwing away your future, Jess," he told me the night before I left for the police academy. "You could be anything. Why settle for this?" He didn't understand that this was exactly what I wanted. The academy in Chicago was the first place I ever felt at home. The days were long and brutal, filled with obstacle courses, mock interrogations, and endless drills. But every challenge made me stronger. I thrived on the pressure. I learned how to read people, how to listen for what they weren't saying. By the end of my first year, I'd already been noticed by a few instructors who recommended me for detective training. I still remember the pride and the shock in my own eyes the day I pinned on my first badge. But back home, none of it seemed to matter. My parents would talk about Alex's progress at Harvard, then his summer internship at a prestigious Manhattan law firm. If my work came up, it was always as an afterthought. "Jess is still out there, catching bad guys," and my dad would say with a half-smile, as if the whole thing were some elaborate Halloween game. After my divorce, the sympathy in their voices grew thicker. My ex-husband, George, had been a fellow officer. We'd met on the job and lasted 5 years before the stress and the strange hours cracked us apart. I worked nights and holidays. He wanted the suburban routine, kids, backyard barbecues, a life far away from sirens and late-night stakeouts. We tried, but sometimes two people can't grow in the same direction. When it ended, my family saw it as further proof that I'd made all the wrong choices. Mum called one Christmas, voice heavy with disappointment, and maybe if you hadn't been chasing criminals, you'd still have a husband. I wanted to yell, to tell her that George couldn't handle my ambition, my drive. That he struggled every time I made a higher rank than him. But I swallowed the words and let her believe whatever was easier. It was always easier for everyone if Jess just played along. Over the years, I learned to compartmentalize. My work life, intense, sometimes dangerous, often deeply rewarding, became a world I didn't share at family dinners. I never told them about the nights I spent tailing suspects through icy Chicago streets, the hours I'd spent in interview rooms talking to people who didn't want to be saved. I never told them about the missing kids I found, the gang cases I cracked, or the times I got a call at 3 a.m. and was out the door before my coffee had even brewed. They never asked, and I never offered. It was as if, by silent agreement, my real life existed outside the neat little box my family had built for me. Then came Alex's engagement, the party, and the way he laughed about my job, my divorce, my security career. I'd love to say it didn't bother me, but it did. Not because I cared what his friends thought, but because every family has a story they tell about each member, and mine had become the cautionary tale. Still, I put on a brave face, because that's what I do. I worked my shifts, solved my cases, paid my bills, and went home to my quiet apartment. I watched the city lights from my window and told myself I was content. Most days, it was true. I'd built a life for myself that made sense, even if it wasn't glamorous. Even if my family would never really understand it. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I was missing out on something, on the approval I'd stopped chasing, or the simple peace that seemed to come so easily to everyone else. Maybe that's why, when Alex called me out of the blue a few weeks after the party, I answered on the first ring. It was 2 a.m, and his number flashed across my screen. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. But his voice was unmistakable, shaky, higher than usual, on the edge of panic. "Jess, I need your help," he whispered. "I'm in serious trouble." There's a kind of panic in a person's voice you never forget, especially when you've spent your adult life hearing every shade of fear on the job. But nothing prepared me for the way Alex sounded that night, like a child lost in a storm. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by half-finished paperwork and cold pizza. The clock on the microwave blinked 2:14 a.m. in a relentless blue glow. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and professional, like I would with any stranger on the street. But this was my brother, and the years of sibling rivalry, silent resentment, and unspoken love made my heart squeeze tight in my chest. He hesitated. "I can't explain over the phone." "Jess, can you come to New York? Please? I know it's late and I know we haven't. I know I haven't always been the best." His voice broke, and I heard him swallow hard. In that instant, all the old wounds faded. No matter what had happened between us, no matter how many times he'd introduced me as the family disappointment, Alex was my brother. I'd always be there for him, even if he'd never really been there for me. Some bonds are just too strong to break. "I'll be there in 3 hours, I said, already grabbing my jacket, badge, and overnight bag. My keys were in my hand before he could respond. The highway from DC to New York felt endless. The darkness outside my windshield was broken only by the occasional semi-truck or the soft golden blare of rest stoplights. The world felt suspended, like I was driving between the chapters of my own life, leaving behind the person my family saw and racing towards something I couldn't name. When I finally pulled up to Alex's apartment building on the Upper West Side, it was nearly dawn. The city was waking up, but the lobby was empty and silent. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, my pulse steady but my mind racing. I was a cop, trained to expect the worst, but I'd never been trained for this. Alex opened the door before I even knocked. I barely recognized him. His usually perfect hair was tousled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red and swollen. The confident smile he wore at the party was gone. In its place was something fragile and raw. He let me in and closed the door softly, as if he were afraid the neighbors might overhear. The apartment was spotless, but there was an edge of chaos, papers scattered across the coffee table, an empty bottle of whiskey beside a half-full glass. We sat in the living room, the early light creeping across the hardwood floors, and I waited. I knew better than to push. Sometimes the hardest part is letting people find their words. Finally, Alex spoke. His voice was flat and tired. "I've been embezzling from my firm." I blinked, trying to process. "How much?" He looked away. "About $2.3 million. It started small, a couple of transfers to cover an investment that went bad. But it got out of control. Now there's an audit. The FBI is involved. Courtney left as soon as she found out. She said she can't be connected to a scandal." For a second, I just stared at him, forcing myself to keep my face neutral. Years of interviews and interrogations had taught me the value of silence. People fill the gaps with the truth they're trying to hide. "How long do you have?" I asked. "They're coming tomorrow. The federal agents." "Jess, I know I have no right to ask, but you're the only family I have left. I need help. You know people. Can you do anything?" He looked at me, desperate, as if he was seeing me for the first time, not as the sister who couldn't keep her life together, but as someone who might actually be able to save his. For years, Alex had no idea what my job really entailed, what I did when I wasn't around for birthdays or holidays. He'd never asked about my late nights, never wondered about the hush in my voice when I answered calls from the precinct. Maybe he just didn't want to know. Now, sitting across from him in his luxury apartment filled with original art and designer furniture, all that distance suddenly closed. "Let me make some calls," I said, my tone quiet but certain. It was the same voice I used in every crisis, a voice that could cut through chaos and keep everyone calm. That night, I called in favors. Not to erase what Alex had done, but to make sure his case would be handled fairly, that he'd be given a chance to cooperate and make restitution. I reached out to contacts I trusted, old friends in the FBI, a federal prosecutor I'd worked cases with, people who owed me for things that never made the news. I wasn't going to break the law for Alex, but I wasn't going to let him be destroyed by one mistake either. He'd already lost enough. The sun was just beginning to rise when I hung up the phone. I sat on the couch and watched my brother sleeping fitfully in the guest room, the weight of his choices pressing down on both of us. For the first time in years, I felt something shift between us, not forgiveness, maybe, but the first fragile thread of understanding. Family is complicated. Sometimes, it takes a crisis to strip away everything else and remind you what really matters. Morning crept in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, lighting up Alex's living room with a cold, grey glow. I found myself pacing by the bookshelf, reading spines I'd seen 100 times but never really noticed. My mind was running through every angle. What would the agents want? What would Alex have to say? What did I actually owe him after all these years of distance? He emerged from the guest room looking worn out but a little steadier. There was something about having a plan, even a desperate one, that seemed to give him a lifeline. I made coffee and we sat in silence, both of us staring at our mugs like they held some kind of answer. Alex was the first to break the quiet. "I know I screwed up. I know I have no right to ask for your help." His voice cracked a little. But I also know you've always handled things I couldn't. Even as kids. I tried to muster a smile, but it felt brittle. Being the family problem solver doesn't pay as well as you think. Alex managed a weak laugh. You were always tougher than me, Jess. I used to tell people I looked out for my little sister, but really, you were the one looking out for me. For a moment, we just let that truth hang in the air. It was the first time I could remember Alex admitting any kind of vulnerability. Maybe that was the real crisis here, not just the lore, but the collapse of everything we'd both pretended about our relationship. Do you want to tell Mom and Dad? I asked quietly. He shook his head quickly, eyes wide. No. Not unless I have to. They still think I'm perfect. Let's keep it that way for another day. It was strangely comforting, the way he reverted to childhood at that moment, wanting to hide from parental disappointment. For all his success, my brother was just as afraid of not being enough. A little before 9. My phone buzzed, a reply from one of my old contacts in the FBI. The message was short and direct. Agents Rodriguez and Kim. Trustworthy. Let them do their jobs. I flagged the case for fair handling. Good luck, Jess. I looked at Alex. They'll be here soon. Let me do the talking first. You need to be honest with them. No games. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. I'll cooperate. Whatever they want. The doorbell rang. Alex paled. I squared my shoulders, switched into the calm, controlled mode I reserved for tense interviews, and opened the door. 2 agents stood in the hallway, Rodriguez, a tall, serious man in a crisp navy suit, and Kim, a woman with a steady, kind expression and a notepad already open in her hand. Good morning. I'm Agent Rodriguez. This is Agent Kim, he said. We're here to speak with Mr. Brown about ongoing federal charges. I stepped forward, offering my badge. Jessica Brown, DC Police. Alex is my brother. He's prepared to cooperate fully. But before you begin, I'd appreciate a brief word. Rodriguez looked at my ID, surprise flickering across his face. Kim's eyebrows rose, but she simply nodded. Of course, Officer Brown. We spoke quietly in the hall, just out of Alex's earshot. My brother made a mistake, but is willing to make full restitution and answer all your questions. He's not a flight risk, and has never been in trouble before. Rodriguez nodded slowly, measuring my words. We're not here to ruin his life, Officer Brown. But this is a federal offense. Full cooperation will help him, but the law is the law. I understand, I said. Just treat him fairly. He glanced at Kim, then back at me. You have my word. They stepped inside, and I stayed nearby as Alex answered their questions, voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as he laid everything out. He didn't try to hide anything. He didn't blame anyone else. I was proud of him, in a strange, heartbreaking way. When it was over, the agents explained the next steps: arraignment, legal counsel, possible deals if Alex was honest and returned the money. They even outlined resources for rehabilitation, not just punishment. There was no handcuffing, no public spectacle, just a quiet, business-like warning that everything would change. After they left, Alex sank into the couch, face in his hands. It's over, isn't it? Not over, I said gently. But different. You have a shot at making things right. He looked at me, eyes glassy. Why did you do this for me? I paused, thinking about all the years of distance and rivalry. Because you're my brother. Because sometimes family is all we have. And because, honestly, you needed to see what it's like to ask for help, not just give it. He didn't answer right away. But I could see it sinking in, the reality, the gratitude, and maybe, for the first time, a sliver of respect for the choices I'd made with my life. I called my lieutenant, told him I'd be late back to DC. Take care of what you need, Jess, he said, no questions asked. My team always had my back, even when my family sometimes didn't. That evening, I stayed in New York. Alex and I didn't talk much. We ordered pizza, watched a Knicks game on mute, and let the silence be enough. There were no grand confessions, no overnight healing. But for the first time in years, my brother and I sat together as equals, not as the golden child and the family misfit, but as two flawed adults trying to fix what they'd broken. As midnight crept up and the city outside fell quiet, I realized something. Sometimes, helping family isn't about fixing everything. Sometimes, it's just about showing up, again and again, until the walls finally come down. I didn't sleep much that night, and I doubt Alex did either. New York felt strangely peaceful from 15 stories up, the city lights painting soft squares across the hardwood. Around 4 a.m., I made coffee and stared out at the skyline, thinking about everything that had brought us to this moment. I'd spent years learning to handle pressure and uncertainty, on the job, on the street, in interrogation rooms. But nothing in the academy ever prepared me for the quiet crises that happen in your own family. By sunrise, Alex looked like he hadn't aged a day, he'd aged a decade. The dark circles under his eyes were deeper, and there was a vulnerability in the way he moved that I'd never seen before. He was always the one with the answers, the fix for every problem, the charm that could get us out of trouble. Now, that armor was gone. What was left was just a man, stripped of his success, trying to face what he'd done. He packed a small bag, like he was preparing for some kind of trip. They said I should expect to be processed in the next 48 hours, he said, voice flat. They'll probably release me until the first hearing, but... God, Jess, how did I let it get this far? I could have told him about stress, or pride, or the pressure to maintain an image that wasn't really real. But I knew he didn't need an explanation. He needed someone to sit beside him and not flinch. Sometimes things spiral, I said softly. Nobody wakes up and decides to ruin their life. You just start making small choices, and before you know it, you're somewhere you never wanted to be. The only thing you can do now is move forward. He nodded. What do I do first? You start by taking responsibility. You talk to your lawyer. You listen to the agents. You return whatever money you can. And then, you start rebuilding. It won't be easy, Alex. But it's not impossible. He gave a short laugh, the first real one since I'd arrived. That almost sounded like one of your motivational speeches from Little League. I wasn't much for speeches, I grinned. But I always showed up, didn't I? He smiled, a small crack in his worry. Yeah. You always did. The next 2 days were a blur, calls with attorneys, meetings with federal agents, and endless paperwork. I sat in on as much as I could, sometimes just for moral support, sometimes to help Alex untangle legalese that made even my head spin. My years on the force meant I knew how the system worked. I could spot when someone was being fair and when someone was trying to make an example out of my brother. The process was exhausting. At times, Alex looked like he might break, but he kept going. He admitted to everything, handed over documents, answered every question. When asked if he'd planned to run, he shook his head. I want to fix what I can. In between all of it, I had to call my captain in DC to explain why I was out of town for so long. He was gruff but understanding. Family first, Brown. Don't let it sink your career, but don't regret helping your brother, either. During a lull on the second evening, Alex and I sat by his window, splitting a pizza that neither of us was really hungry for. The city pulsed below, full of lives going on, unaware of the little implosions happening inside quiet apartments. He looked at me. I know I've been difficult. I know I never made it easy for you. I shrugged. We're family. That's the job, right? We drive each other nuts, but when it matters, we show up. He nodded. You know, growing up, I thought you were reckless. You scared me sometimes, the way you'd talk back to Dad, the way you'd fight for what you wanted. I envied that. I was too scared to disappoint anybody. That caught me off guard. I always thought you had it all together. He snorted. Most of the time, I was just faking it. You were brave enough to be yourself. I spent years trying to be who I thought everyone wanted. The honesty hung between us. For a long time, we watched the city lights, saying nothing. It was the closest we'd come to understanding each other since we were teenagers. Finally, Alex said, I'm glad you're here, Jess. I don't deserve it, but I'm glad. You're my brother, I replied. Nothing's going to change that. Later, as I tried to sleep on his lumpy guest bed, I thought about how many families only see each other during holidays or funerals. How easy it is to let old stories define who we are to the people who think they know us best. Maybe, I thought, this crisis was a chance to write something new. When I left for DC the next day, I hugged Alex for the first time in years. He looked at me with a gratitude that needed no words. As my train pulled away from Penn Station, I realized family isn't about having all the right answers or living up to anyone's story. It's about showing up when it's hardest and loving people through their worst days. Even if it means letting go of what you wish they were and learning to see who they really are. Returning to DC felt almost surreal after everything that had happened in New York. The world kept spinning, traffic crawled along K Street, tourists snapped photos on the mall, and my precinct hummed with the everyday tension of paperwork, radios, and ringing phones. But something had shifted inside me. For once, the chaos of my work life felt almost comforting, a rhythm I understood, with problems I could fix. Still, Alex was never far from my mind. Every evening, after my shift, I checked my phone for updates from his attorney or a nervous text from him. I was surprised at how much I worried about him, after all those years of cold holidays and silent judgments. But now, I realized the resentment had thinned out, replaced by something closer to hope. Maybe he'd finally learn what it was to face yourself, flaws and all, and not turn away. One Friday evening, a week after I'd returned, Mom called. Her voice was brisk, as if she'd just come in from running errands. Jessica, are you working late again? Yeah, Mom. Night shift this week. Everything okay? She hesitated. I got a weird call from Alex yesterday. He sounded different. Is he all right? I paused, trying to decide how much to reveal. Alex had made me promise not to tell our parents the details. He wanted to handle it himself. But I could hear the real question beneath her words. Had her golden boy fallen off his pedestal? Had her daughter been right to worry about him all along? He's going through a rough patch, I said gently. But he's working through it, Mom. Give him a little time. She sighed. I wish you'd both just come home more often. Sometimes it feels like I don't even know what's happening in your lives anymore. That stung a little. We're still here, Mom. Just trying to figure things out. Like everyone. After we hung up, I sat in the squad room with my coffee growing cold. It hit me how much distance had grown between all of us, not just Alex and me, but our whole family. Maybe it was the price of ambition, of chasing different dreams in different cities. Or maybe it was the old stories, the ones we let define us even when they stopped being true. At work, things moved on. I caught up on my open cases, robbery on U Street, a string of car thefts in Adams Morgan, a runaway teenager reunited with her mother after 3 tense days. I lost myself in the details, crime scenes, witness statements, endless paperwork. I was good at my job, and for a while, that was enough. But sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself staring at my reflection in the squad car window, wondering if anyone really saw who I'd become. Not just the girl who worked security or the failed wife or the family misfit, but a woman who'd built something real, who'd stood in the hard places and chosen to stay. A month passed. Alex called occasionally, each time sounding a little more steady. He told me about his court hearings, the restitution he was arranging, the mandatory counseling sessions. He didn't ask for advice, just for someone to listen, to remind him that he wasn't alone. One evening, I got off duty just as the sky was turning pink over the Potomac. I walked along the waterfront, breathing in the warm, humid air. I thought about the last year, about how easy it was to lose sight of who you really were when you let other people write your story. That weekend, I finally let myself do something I hadn't done in years. I invited my parents to visit. I cleaned my apartment, bought groceries, and tried to imagine what it would be like to just be real with them. No hiding, no pretending. They arrived on Saturday afternoon, looking a little older than I remembered. My dad commented on the traffic. My mom fussed about my bare fridge. We had dinner at a small Italian place around the corner, and for once, nobody asked about my love life. We talked about my cases, about the city, about Alex, skirting around the specifics. But closer to the truth than ever before. As they left the next morning, Mom hugged me tight. "You're doing good, Jess. I don't say it enough." I smiled, surprised by the sudden ache in my chest. "Thanks, Mom. I'm trying." As their car disappeared down the street, I realized something. It's never too late to change the story your family tells about you. It just takes showing up, again and again, until they finally see you for who you really are. Another month passed. Summer in DC was in full swing. Muggy mornings, the city a blur of tourists and street festivals, the kind of relentless humidity that made you long for an air-conditioned squad car. Most days, my life returned to its familiar pace. Morning runs past the Capitol, late shifts at the precinct, after-work beers with my partner, Sam. But even in the routine, the events in New York hung at the edges of my mind. Sometimes I get a call from Alex, sometimes just a text, A court hearing went okay. Aori another meeting with my lawyer today. His messages were short, but they carried a vulnerability that was new, a kind of humility that only comes after life has knocked you flat. It was early August when he finally called and asked if he could come visit me. I just want to get out of New York for a weekend, he said. If you've got the time. I hesitated. There was still a part of me that wanted to hold on to old grudges, to keep him as the perfect brother in one box and the family disappointment in another. But I knew that wasn't fair. If we were going to start over, it had to be now. Of course, I said. You're always welcome. Alex arrived on a Saturday afternoon. He looked different, less polished, but more real. He carried a battered duffel bag instead of a designer briefcase. No suit, just jeans and a faded Yankees t-shirt. I recognized something familiar in the way he smiled, a hint of the brother I'd grown up with before adulthood and expectations got in the way. We spent the first hour just walking around my neighborhood, grabbing coffee, talking about nothing. The city was alive, kids running through sprinklers, dogs tugging on leashes, people laughing at sidewalk cafes. It was almost easy to forget the shadows hanging over us. Back at my place, I cooked dinner while Alex leaned against the counter, watching. You know, he said, I always imagined your life as lonelier. I guess I thought you lived in some tiny box, eating frozen dinners alone. I laughed. You'd be surprised how much life there is when you stop caring what everyone else thinks. He grinned, nodding. Yeah, I'm starting to get that. That night, we sat on my tiny balcony, listening to the city buzz below. Alex told me about his court-mandated therapy. It's strange, you know? I spent years pretending nothing bothered me. Now I have to sit in a room and talk about how afraid I was, of failing, of not being enough. I sipped my beer, feeling the truth of his words. Everyone's afraid, Alex. Some of us just get better at hiding it. He was quiet for a long moment. I used to think your job was running from something. Maybe you were running towards something, after all. We talked for hours about childhood memories, about Mom and Dad, about all the things we never said out loud when we were younger. There was anger, yes, but more than that, there was relief, like we'd both been carrying too much for too long, and finally set it down. Before he went to bed, Alex paused in the hallway. Jess, I never gave you enough credit. For your strength. For doing things your own way. I spent so long judging you, maybe because I didn't have the guts to be honest with myself. My voice was soft. We all get there in our own time. He nodded, wiping at his eyes. Thanks for not giving up on me. The next day, we drove out to Great Falls Park. It was one of those blisteringly hot Virginia afternoons, but the sound of the river and the smell of pine made it worth it. We walked in companionable silence, watching families picnic and hikers scramble across the rocks. After a while, Alex stopped, looking out over the water. I don't know what comes next, he said. I don't know if I'll ever be who I thought I was supposed to be. I put a hand on his shoulder. You get to decide that now. Nobody else. On the way back, he turned to me. Do you think Mom and Dad will ever forgive me? I thought about that for a long time. They might not understand right away. But families have a way of healing, if you give them a chance. He smiled, a little more hopeful. If they can forgive me, maybe I can start forgiving myself. That evening, as Alex packed his bag to leave, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't angry with him. I was proud, not because he'd fixed everything, but because he was finally learning how to start over. As he hugged me goodbye, I told him, "You know where to find me. Anytime." His voice was steady. "I know. Thanks, Jess, for everything." When he was gone, I sat by the window, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. Maybe family isn't about being perfect, or even always understanding each other. Maybe it's just about showing up, again and again, even when the story changes. Autumn settled over DC, painting the city in red and gold, and life kept rolling forward. The days got shorter, the air sharper, and my work routine settled into its familiar late-year urgency. I felt a subtle shift inside, like something heavy had finally lifted, though I couldn't say exactly when it happened. Maybe it was watching Alex learn to rebuild. Maybe it was letting go of the old family stories that had held me back. Maybe it was just time. A few weeks after Alex's visit, I got a call from him late one Thursday night. I was on my couch, still in uniform, half watching an old detective show and half dozing. His name flashed on my screen. This time, there was no panic in his voice, just quiet honesty. "Jess, I wanted to tell you something before you hear it from anyone else. I took a plea. They're sending me to a halfway house in Queens for the rest of the year. After that, I'll be on probation. No more law license. No more old life." There was a pause. He was waiting for me to judge, or to pity him. I did neither. "I'm proud of you," I said. "For owning your mistakes. For trying to make things right." He let out a shaky laugh. "I was expecting you to say you told me so." I smiled, feeling a surprising warmth. "You know me better than that." We talked for nearly an hour. He told me about the group counseling, about the men he'd met, people who'd lost more than money or status, people who were learning to live honestly, maybe for the first time. "It's humbling," he said. "I thought I had nothing in common with these guys, but we're all trying to find a way forward. I'm learning a lot, mostly about myself." At some point, he got quiet. "Do you think Mom and Dad will ever really understand?" I considered this. "I think they're trying. That's all any of us can do." He laughed again, softer this time. "I guess that makes two of us." That weekend, I met up with my partner, Sam, for dinner. She could always tell when something was on my mind. Over steak and fries, she nudged me. "So, heard from your brother?" I nodded. "He's in a halfway house now. Lost everything, but he sounds better than he has in years." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Sometimes you have to lose your old life to build something new. You two, you're close?" I hesitated. We weren't. Not really. But maybe now we're finally figuring out how to be. She grinned. "Welcome to adulthood. Messy, isn't it?" We laughed. For the first time, the ache-eyed carrot of being misunderstood, of not measuring up, felt like it was starting to fade. A few days later, Mom called. There was a tremor in her voice I hadn't heard before, as if she was searching for the right words. "Your brother called me, Jessica. He told me everything." I waited, bracing for disappointment or anger. But she surprised me. I just wanted to say, I'm glad he had you. I'm sorry we didn't always see how much you were holding together. For him, for all of us. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. She paused. Are you happy, Jessica? Really happy? It was a question nobody in my family had ever asked me before. I thought of my life, messy, busy, imperfect, and realized, to my surprise, the answer was yes. I am, I said. I really am. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony, listening to the city hum and thinking about everything that had changed. I thought about all the years I'd spent feeling like the family failure, the sister who couldn't keep her life or her marriage together, the one who never quite fit. I realized, finally, that the only expectations that mattered were my own. Later that week, Alex called again. Guess who stopped by? He said with a wry chuckle. Courtney. She wanted to talk, maybe get back together now that the dust has settled. I rolled my eyes. You didn't, did you? He laughed. No way. I told her I needed to figure out who I was, without anyone else's approval. Good for you, Alex. He was quiet for a second. I owe you 30 years of apologies, Jess. For every time I made you feel small, for every story I told about you that wasn't true. I had no idea what you were carrying. I felt something in me soften. We're both learning, Alex. That's what matters. He sighed, but there was hope in his voice. Maybe next year will be different. For both of us. Maybe it will, I agreed. As fall turned to winter, I felt gratitude for second chances. For Alex, for my family, for myself. I was no longer the disappointment, no longer the invisible one. I was Jessica Brown, daughter, sister, detective. A woman who had learned that real strength isn't about being perfect, but about showing up when it counts, again and again, even after everything falls apart. And that, I realized, was enough. Winter came early that year, blanketing DC in a rare hush of snow. Even the city seemed softer, more forgiving, like everyone had taken a collective breath and decided to give themselves a little grace. For the first time in a long time, I felt the same way about my own life. Alex called on Christmas morning. I was off duty for once, making pancakes in my pajamas and listening to old Motown songs on the radio. When I answered, he sounded lighter, like the weight he'd carried for so long had finally started to lift. Merry Christmas, Jess, he said. Merry Christmas, Alex. How's the halfway house treating you? He chuckled. Let's just say institutional coffee isn't great, but the company's getting better. We had a little breakfast here. Guys told stories, traded memories. It wasn't fancy, but it felt real. I smiled, picturing my brother surrounded by men who, like him, were learning to put themselves back together piece by piece. Sounds like progress. It is, he agreed. And I wanted to thank you again. Not just for helping me through the legal mess, but for not giving up on me. You showed up, Jess. Even when I didn't deserve it. There was a lump in my throat as I answered, That's what family does. Even when we get it wrong. He was quiet for a moment. When I get out, do you think we could, maybe, do a family dinner? All of us. No pretending, no hiding. I laughed. I'd like that. I think it's time we started telling new stories about who we are. After we hung up, I sat by my window, watching the city wake up under a coat of snow, thinking about how much had changed in just a year. The old bitterness I used to carry, about Alex, about my parents, about being their family disappointment, felt distant now, almost like a story I'd once read about someone else. Later that day, I met up with Sam for coffee. The city was nearly empty, all the usual rush gone for the holiday. She sipped her latte and studied me over the rim of her mug. "You look different," as she said. "Yeah." I grinned. Maybe I finally believe I belong here. She nudged me playfully. "You always did. The rest of us were just catching up." I laughed, grateful for the simple truth of it. Sometimes the people who see you the clearest aren't the ones you expect. That evening, my parents called. They sounded tired but happy, sharing stories from a quiet holiday at home. For the first time in years, the conversation wasn't about who done what or who had failed at what dream. We talked about real things, about how hard it is to start over, about forgiveness, about the ways we all try to protect each other and sometimes get it wrong. Before we hung up, my dad said, "You know, Jess, your brother told me something last week. He said you saved his life." "I think he's right." I swallowed, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "He saved himself, Dad. I just showed up." My mom added, "We're proud of you, Jessica. Not just for what you do, but for who you are." I let their words wash over me, not as the validation I used to crave, but as a simple gift. Maybe that's all I ever really needed from them, not approval, but acceptance. As the new year approached, I made a quiet promise to myself to stop living for anyone else's version of my story. To trust that the work I do, the love I give, the life I've built, is enough. That being a sister, a daughter, a detective, being Jessica Brown, isn't just good enough, it's more than enough. A few weeks later, Alex was released. I picked him up outside the halfway house, the city around us sparkling with the pale light of early morning. He looked older, but also freer, stripped of the old masks he used to wear. We hugged, awkward at first, then real and strong. "So, what now?" he asked. "Now?" I smiled. "Now you get to decide who you want to be. And I get to keep being your sister." We went out for breakfast, nothing fancy, just strong coffee and pancakes at a corner diner. We talked about the future, new jobs, new relationships, the possibility of family dinners that weren't about proving anything, but just about being together. As we walked outside into the winter sun, I realized how much had changed. Not the facts of our lives, those were still complicated, messy, imperfect. But the stories we told about ourselves and about each other had finally shifted. Alex reached for my hand, like he used to when we were kids. "Thanks, Jess, for everything." I squeezed his hand back. "Always, Alex. Always." As we walked down the street, side by side, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't known in years. Maybe that's what family is, after all, not the old stories that hold us back, but the courage to write new ones, together. And so, as a new chapter began, I knew one thing for sure. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And this time, I was ready for whatever came next.